come Holy Spirit.
Hey, Bellator Society. Welcome to our live show. I'm Tracy, and I've got Fran here. And we have a guest with us today, Sam Denefe.
No, Denefe.
No. Denefe.
Y'all, I'm real bad with names. If you ever watch any of our shows, you know I'm terrible. And so Fran said it the wrong way this morning. It got in my head.
I did. It's my fault.
Because I can normally really mess up names on my own. Sam is here to talk to us about forming intentional disciples and just evangelization. She was actually an atheist, correct me if I'm wrong,
yes.
in college, and really just fell in love with the Eucharist and had this radical conversion, and spent the next, I don't know how many years of her life, just forming intentional disciples really through the Focus ministry, right?
At first it was through Evangelical Catholic, but Focus does a lot of great stuff. And then just through different parishes I was hired on at.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
And now you're stay-at-home mom, and you're still doing the work of evangelization from home, correct?
Yes. Stay home with my kids, evangelizing my kids. You know, COVID hit, so there's not a lot of ministry going on.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Hi, Fran. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. So I want to know, so I have known Sam for, I think, like about 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you remember when we first met, Sam, but it was in a little bakery, like a little family bakery in Hillcrest. Do you remember? And we met, and you are the first person who told me about this book ever in the world. And right after we had coffee, I went and bought this book and just like fell in love. It's a fantastic book. And so we want to talk about the book, but before we talk about the book today, I want to talk about you. I didn't know you were an atheist.
Yeah. I went
to about that.
Yeah. So I went to 12 years of Catholic school, or over 12 years, because I started in pre-K, went through 12th grade. And when I graduated, I was an atheist. And nothing against the Catholic school I went to. It was a good school. But I think for my family, the conversation basically when I was born went with like this, like, hey, what do you want to raise our kids? And my dad was Catholic and my mom was a Protestant. And he's like, well, I want to raise them Catholic. And my mom said, okay, I just don't know anything about it. And my dad said, I'll take care of it, and threw us in Catholic school. And that was probably the last conversation about God in our household.
Wow. Yeah.
So we went to Catholic school. I was baptized. I have younger siblings. They were all baptized. We all went through First Communion. But the faith wasn't really ever alive. And the Catholic school was good because I don't know if I'd be Catholic without it. But at the same time, I felt there was a disconnect there from what I was seeing in the people, and a lot of my classmates, you know, as they were saying that they were really Catholic and they were in the youth groups, and then they'd also be the ones like drinking or, you know, like gossiping. And I remember specifically my sophomore year. Oh, I just lost my mic. Excuse me. My sophomore year in high school, we had a great teacher who I gave fits to, because I gave fits to all my theology teachers, unfortunately. And we were talking, and I remember learning about scripture, and it said, Jesus says that, you know, I'm leaving, but don't freak out. I'm going to send the Holy Spirit, and you'll do everything that I've done and more. Yeah. And I remember looking around the classroom and being like, y'all say you're Catholic, and I haven't seen any of you raise someone from the dead, let alone walk on water, let alone just like get through the day without gossiping. So
yeah. Or just be nice.
Right? But that's teenagers.
Yes, it is.
That's teenagers.
Catholics, non-Catholics.
Right. So when I came out, I ran the opposite direction. It's like, I'm atheist, and went to a very liberal college that celebrated lots of different viewpoints, and supported my atheism for quite a few years. So I was actually kind of an evangelist for the other team. Like, I remember my freshman year talking to a girl, and she said she believed in Jesus. And I said, you know, I didn't know that educated people believed in sky fairies. So when I believe something, I believe it very strongly. And then my junior year, basically everything that I used to identify who I was disappeared pretty quickly. I was going to be this hotshot doctor, traveling the world. I had I was working on my biology degree, and realized I was afraid of blood. So that wasn't a good fit for me. just a little bit. I fainted in the middle of a surgery. I was like, oh, yeah, this isn't going to work. I was playing basketball in college and I quit. This guy I'd been dating for 5 years, we broke up. And the only thing that I kind of had left, like friend groups and social stuff that I was doing, was the Catholic campus ministry my freshman year had reached out to me because I graduated from Catholic school and knew I existed. And they had like a little choir and a little mass that they did on Sunday evenings. And I would go occasionally to sing in the choir because with pre-med and basketball, I couldn't do any music. And in high school, I was in all the musical theater and the choirs and everything. And so that was my little baby musical outlet. So I still kind of had that connection. And in my dorm room, I prayed. I was like, all right, Jesus, like I've lost everything. If you're real and you exist, like this is your shot. Otherwise, I'm moving on with my life. So here we go. And I jumped into the Catholic campus ministry. And because of my Catholic education, I did all the things that I thought you needed to do. Because if I was going to be a saint, or if I was going to be Catholic, I was going to be a saint. And I knew enough from the Catholic Church, from my upbringing in the school, that I needed to be going to daily mass and I needed to be praying and all this stuff. And I discovered Jesus in the Eucharist and tried really hard to be that perfect saint. And through that, learned that God was real and that you can have a personal relationship with him. And it just started this beautiful journey where I went from running away from him, saying he doesn't exist, I don't believe in him, to knowing like deep within my soul that he's real and that he loves us and he wants to be with us and that miracles can happen today and he can speak with us. So.
Oh man, that's beautiful. So basically you went from running from God to chasing people for him.
Yes.
Because that led you into a career in faith formation for parishes, just as you mentioned before. And so I'd love to kind of tie in your experience in coming to know Jesus in a personal way and really becoming a disciple yourself to moving to this idea of discipling other people. Like those are very different things. Like they are like, how did you get there? How did you cross that bridge?
So I think the first year of my conversion was just rocky because I had been living such a contrary life to the gospel and been running away from God for so long. I didn't trust anything. So the first year of my relationship with God was a lot of fighting. And I was very blessed to have a deacon at our Catholic campus ministry who would fight with me. Like one time,
key. Yes,
it was awesome.
Yeah,
like we got into a yelling argument in our Catholic campus ministry house about condoms. Okay, because I was like, I don't know about that. So, but I found over and over again, every time I really looked into the hot buttons, hot topic issues that we have in the faith, that the Catholic Church was right and I was usually wrong.
Well, I find that so often and just, I mean, even when I talk to like my kids or youth in general, like the Catholic Church has been standing for 2,000 years, push hard. And I feel like the problem is that people aren't doing what you did and just kept pushing, like keep pushing, don't run away, just keep pushing. That's so admirable that you had the will to like, not like to try to win. You know?
Yes. To hold his own, you know, in that conversation and wasn't like, okay, you're kind of a pain in my neck and you know, you're mouthy or, you know, that he was able to lean back into you and have those hard conversations.
Yeah, it was amazing. And especially because he's an elderly man and here's this 21-year-old kid, like, you know, thinking she knows everything. But it was great. And I love that about specifically the Catholic faith. And I always tell the kids, like, God is truth, not God likes truth or we need to be honest, but God equals signs truth. So that means that if you keep pushing and you find truth, like real truth, you found God. Yeah. And so the Catholic Church is one of the few like faiths I feel like that really pushes you to go for the truth.
Right.
So, and I found that in my journey. So when I started switching over to discipling other people was, I feel like after that first year and kind of wrestling with all those things, my second year, which was my senior year, I was asked to help lead the Catholic campus ministry. So they have Deacon Richard Papini, who's amazing, and then they'd have like a student underneath them. The student before me is now a priest, Father Will Burmester, and like he's amazing. So he helped disciple me too. So I had lots of people pouring into me, and then all of a sudden I got flipped into a leadership position, and now I didn't have a choice but to disciple other people. And that was the focus of that Catholic campus ministry. They partnered with Evangelical Catholic, which did amazing things there, taught us how to evangelize, how to disciple. And it made so much sense for me. And then a little bit later out came Sherry's book, Forming Intentional Disciples. And I read it and I was like, yes, this is what I went through. This is what I've been struggling to convey to other Catholics, because I feel like so often as Catholics, I like the saying, we're the frozen chosen. Like people are just going to church, but it's not really affecting their lives. Yeah. And when I read the book, I was like, this puts to words what I feel like I was fighting and struggling with to convey to other people. And so from that point on, really everything I did was about evangelization and discipleship and how to help people come to know Jesus in a personal way so that they can understand the beauty of the Eucharist and the beauty of the Catholic Church. Because you really need that personal relationship that goes two ways. You're talking to God and he's talking back. I don't know why people don't think he talks back, but he does.
Because we're never quiet to listen.
Never quiet. No, I'm guilty. I'm so guilty. I just talk. Now, can I ask you real quick, how were your parents? How were they feeling through all this? Because it sounds like maybe they weren't necessarily, pouring into you and your faith life as you were growing up, but it sounds like they do believe in God. And obviously it was important enough to send you to a Catholic school. So when you really rebelled, because you didn't just fall away, you fell away and kicked and screamed and, how, and then on the flip side, as you came back, what's their reaction been?
So I think because it happened in my early 20s, I think parents are like, yeah, okay, Sam, this is just your next thing. So it took a while. Now my parents are divorced. They divorced right before I went to college, and their faith journeys are their own stories. And so I don't really want to get into that, because maybe one day they'll share their stories and it will be beautiful. But I know for a while, my family was kind of confused when I made that major flip. I had one family member sit me down and say, hey, we're all worried about you because you were going to be this hotshot doctor. And with my big conversion, I was like, I'm going to be a nun because I love Jesus. So it was big flip. Yeah. And so that's a whole nother story. But I was set on being a nun. And so I was talking about Jesus, trying to evangelize my family. And a lot of people, I feel like in the early stages of their faith walk, do that. They try to go in guns blazing because they're so on fire. And it turns people off. I'm much wiser now. And it's been 10 years.
Aren't we all?
So I turned a lot of my family members off by talking too much about Jesus and pushing it too hard. And it took quite a while to where I repaired some of that, to where I can talk to some family members now more about Jesus in a way that's gentle and inviting and not hitting them over the head with the Bible.
Yeah, I so identify with that. Again, in my early 20s, especially, where you kind of come into maturity of faith and you start to take ownership and think you have all the answers. And it's so funny. So one of our very close family friends, a priest, recently passed away, and I had sent him when I was 21, this treatise that I had written on justification to give to a family member because they needed to know. And obviously at 21, I was the expert on justification and salvation. So I wrote like a 10-page paper on it and sent it to them, which I'm pretty sure they never read. But after this priest friend died, he had kept the paper. And so it was sent back to me. I'm so scared to read it. I'm frightened. I am legitimately frightened to read this because it's going to be horrible. It's going to be uncharitable. It's going to be academic. It's going to be not evangelistic. And I feel like, huh?
You haven't read it?
No, I cannot. I can't do it.
should be a penance.
But I would like to say, I feel like when you were saying that, you turned people off, then I identify with that. And it does take a long time to repair that so that you become credible in your Christian witness. That, I'm not trying to beat you or win this argument, like, I know that this is all hard now, this many years later, 20 something years later.
Well, and I think that's why discipleship is so key. We have these people who have these beautiful experiences, but we don't really, in our church culture, have anything set up to help them through it. Because I just think, like, if I had a good mentor, and I did have lots of mentors in my life, but if I had someone like really pouring in and discipling me, like, that should be a point of conversation. Like, hey, you had this awesome experience. Let's talk about how to share it gently,
yes.
charitably, yes. Because you're on fire. And so I think that's why it's also really important to understand the stages of spiritual development, which Sherry talks about in her book.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So let's jump into that, because I feel like those are such key, and we're not going to be able to do it justice. Like, if you're interested in this stuff, guys, buy the book because it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. I do want to start maybe with a couple of statistics, just so that people understand what the lay of the land is, and why this is problematic, or why it's even concerning, or something that we should be paying attention to. Because 79% of those who have dropped the name Catholic and claim no religious affiliation, so the nuns that we hear like Bishop Barron talking about all the time, have done so by the age of 23. We lose almost 80% of these people by age 23. Like, that's a very young, just as you said, and it has been my experience, like, that's when your life changes, like when you grow into maturity, and we're losing them even before then,
and they're not coming back.
Oh,
and that's the part that I used to do something called I'd call a stat rant. So
do it. Can you do it here? Do the stat rant. I want to hear
it. Okay, so I would start when I was a director of evangelization. The first thing I did was I went to all the different groups in my parish, and we were like a mid-sized parish, and I'd do a presentation on discipleship and evangelization. And I started with a stat rant, because what I found is so many people had no idea how bad it was. Like, they would complain they didn't see young people. So I'd say, right now, 30% of adults raised Catholic are still practicing. Only half of those attend Mass. That's 45% over the age of 65 are attending Mass. 20% are ages 47 to 64. 13% 26 to 46. 10% of people ages 18 to 25 are attending Mass. 10% of all adults in the U.S. are former Catholics. So that means 1 out of 10 people you meet grew up Catholic but are no longer practicing. The annual number of converts dropped 35% from 2008 to 2009. Only 2 in 10 people under the age of 30 believe attending church is important or worthwhile. Only 2. And that's all denominations. 35% of millennials, which is like those graduating college right now, they're kind of getting into the next generation. So our young people to like 40, depending on what information you look at, millennials have an
Oregon Trail millennials.
The what?
Oregon Trail millennials. Those are like the early 40 millennials, where we're not like, are you Gen X? Are you millennial? Yeah. What are you? Like, it's the people who played Oregon Trail on the computer and then taught our younger siblings to play it.
Yes. That's awesome. Yeah. So only 35% of them have an anti-church stance. Mm-hmm. So they believe that church does more harm than good. And you already said that by the age of 23, 80% of Catholics has left the faith. But why do they leave? Well, if they become Protestant, 71% will say that their spiritual needs weren't being met in the Catholic Church. Yeah. 62% will say they felt called by God to join a new church. I want to say that one again. So of those people leaving the church, 62% said they felt called by God to leave the Catholic Church. 70% said they found a religion they liked more. Of those that just drifted away, the nuns that we hear of, like you said, Bishop Barron, 71% say they just kind of drifted away, just slow faith. 65% said they stopped believing in the teachings of the Catholic Church. And then Dynamic Catholic projected that out of the 740,000 children baptized Catholic last year, by the age of 22, only 9% will be practicing the faith. So I'd go on those big, long stat rants to try to prove, like, hey, we're in trouble what we're doing is not working.
Right.
Let's try something different. And for the most part, I'd say the majority of people, it kind of woke them up. I had like 1 or 2 people out of 10 years who like were really upset that I went on a stat rant. But most people were like, wow, you know, and they really struggled with the by age 23, 80% leave, especially my older generation people, because they're like, well, they come back when they get married, and they don't anymore. And they're like, well, they come back when they want their kids baptized, and they don't anymore. And millennials are not putting their kids in catechesis classes.
Yeah.
They're just not. So something has to change.
Well, and I might even argue that even if they put their kids in catechesis classes, that isn't what's going to keep them in the church, because evangelization begins in the home. Like, just as you said, like when we send our children, when we outsource evangelizing our own children, they've already begun with a handicap. They've already begun with, well, mom, it's not that important to mom and dad. They're sending me to somebody else to do this. And that has been my experience just as a catechist, just dealing with young people. Like, if the parents are not involved, the kids do not have a value for it by and large. There are a couple of special kids that are like, this is fascinating, I've never heard this before. But by and large, if the parents are not teaching it at home, it easily translates to disinterest in whatever class you put them in.
Yeah.
So what did you learn through? I mean, give us some tips. How do you evangelize and make disciples? How do you make people, pour into people, like you said, and mentor people so that they can go and do that, and the ripple effect goes out? What are like your top couple tips for forming disciples?
I think first you need to understand the spiritual thresholds, is what Sherry calls them, or the spiritual stages. If you're talking just like one-on-one, and then also you need to understand, like, you need it to happen within an intimate relationship. So going on the street corner and screaming in a microphone that you're going to hell is not very effective. Now, occasionally I've talked to those people to be like, just curious, how often does this work for you? So occasionally it does work, and you usually see super radical stories when it does. But for the majority of people, what works is when you're in a trusted relationship with somebody, and you can really explore the faith together. And then you are mentoring that person as they're walking through the spiritual stages. Now, often what happens in the Catholic Church, so one tip would be, is we assume that people are way further spiritually along than they are. So for example, and then we'll go through the stages really, really quick. We don't have like tons of time to do that. But when I started at one church, I said, give me your top 20 people. I want the top 20 people, your most spiritual people, your most committed people. And as a staff, we got together, we came up with this list of names. The priest and I got together, we came up with this list, and then I'd call them and we'd talk and we'd go out for coffee. And I invited them into a discipleship process. An evangelical Catholic was in partnership with us, so they were walking me through this. But we invited them into a discipleship process, and I went in thinking, okay, so this is my top 20. This is going to be low-hanging fruit. It's going to be really easy this first year, and then we'll multiply really fast, because then these people were going to ask to disciple other people, but we got to teach them first. Well, out of those 20 people, 2 had a regular prayer life. And a regular prayer life, I think, is a key indicator of, are you intimately following Jesus? Now, that's going to look different for everybody at different stages of their life. Like, I'm pregnant. I've got 2 little ones, a 6 and a 2-year-old. I'd like to say I get up every morning and spend an hour in scripture, but for me right now, that's just not doable. But ideally, you're at least setting aside like 15 minutes a day to speak with God and to listen to God. And that, I feel like, is one of those key indicators of, are you a disciple? With, the caveat, like, if something's going on in your life, God understands and he still wants to be with you, right? But out of 20 people, the best of the best in our parish, 2 had any resemblance of a regular prayer life. So just think, like, all of our programs, all of our things that we're doing, we're like assuming these people are at this deep maturity because they're involved and they're the best of the best. But really only 2 even know that God can speak to them and they can speak to God and are willing to sacrifice time to put God first in their day. So my first tip would be don't assume that anybody is mature. Because you do more harm than good when you assume someone's way farther than they are. Because let's say I remember in one of my RCIA classes, I had someone who really wanted to teach about Fatima, Our Lady of Fatima, who's beautiful, and I love her, and I love her teachings. But they're pretty advanced. She talks about people falling into hell like snowflakes. And with my RCI people who are just coming into the Catholic Church, who may be unsure about Mary, who don't know about, I don't know where they're at spiritually, if they have a relationship with God. If I go in there and I start talking about people going into hell like snowflakes, I might scare them away. They might be like, I don't know about that God. I'm not going into hell, So we have to be careful. We try to go really deep, really fast with people. And they're just not at that level of intimacy yet.
Okay.
Or depending on novel fascinations, not that Our Lady of Fatima is a novel fascination. I mean, it's a church approved apparition. She had, again, just as you said, beautiful, important messages about prayer for our time. But for some people who do not have that basic catechesis of the faith, it can be a novel fascination, and those go away. We get distracted, like a squirrel's over here, I'm going to go look at that squirrel. You know what I mean? We can't start there. We do have to start, just as you said, in relationship and with just basic catechesis. This is what the church teaches. This is what, because even reading about praying the rosary isn't basic catechesis. It's not building a relationship with God. It is part of the communion of saints. I mean, our Blessed Mother is integral to our faith. Absolutely, she is our mother. However, we have to start very, especially with people who do not grow up Catholic, who it's not in their language. And that's so difficult sometimes, because as Catholics, we have words, we have friends, we have the saints who seem so normal to us. It doesn't seem like that would be something that would make people fall away. I mean, it makes sense to us. So having that mindset of what is the gentle entry there is so key. Oh my goodness.
Yes. And I think since I was an atheist and I bucked at so many ideas, it made it easier for me to, when people are at the beginning stages, to say oh, I thought that. So this would have been more helpful to talk about rather than, the deep catechesis. Especially, so there's 5 spiritual stages that Sherry outlines. And the first stage is an initial trust. And that's kind of like the intimate relationship. We really got to look at, does that person trust Jesus or the church or a Christian believer? I sometimes like calling it a trust bridge. They could have just had a positive association with the church, and then they're just at trust. So, and they could still be going to church every single week and just be at initial trust, because, when they go to church, they feel good about themselves. They feel like they can check something off. And so they have some trust there. Or maybe their grandma was Catholic and prayed the rosary, and when she died, she gave it to you. And so that's a positive association you have with the church. It doesn't mean anything else beyond that. And then the next stage is spiritual curiosity, where you begin to be curious about Jesus or his teachings, or even about the person that you have trust with. Wait, why do you go to church on Sunday? I don't understand. That's such an old thing to do. And so people begin to be curious. Yeah.
I think especially with coronavirus, I think that it's the flood of people who are okay, so I can do this spiritual communion thing just fine, church approved. Why do I really need to be doing this? I mean, I'm worried about the fallout.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting how we come out of coronavirus as a church, and what kind of ministries we start looking at, and how we handle it. Because when people are at these earlier spiritual stages, they just might not come back.
Right.
So it will be more important for us to really go out to them, which is key in discipling. One thing that I always did, and some staff kind of struggled with why I was doing this so much, but I'd meet with people one-on-one, and I'd purposely not meet in the church. We'd go out.
Would you meet in a bakery by chance?
I found a bakery. I went to different bakeries and said, will you give me a discount if I come here all the time? And I found one. I was like, I will bring you so much business if you just give me like free coffee occasionally. So that's where we met. That's my favorite little bakery.
It's so good.
That's awesome.
But hey, I think I kept that place in business because after a while, there were my small groups were meeting there and stuff.
Exactly.
It was good. It was fun. But I'd meet somewhere that was off campus because people like when they came to meet me, which I did have like in-person meetings at my parish in my office. But I tried to get off campus as much as possible because for people who are at those lower spiritual stages, it just opened them up more. They were more comfortable than going into the church to have a meeting about their spiritual life. Like that gets scary versus us like going out for coffee.
It's like you're called to the principal's office.
Yes.
Let's be honest, when you meet your friend and you want to talk about things, or you're going to meet in a comfortable space. And so I think that's what we have to do better in our evangelization is meeting people where they are and meeting people in comfortable places. Like, let's go get coffee. Let's visit, because you are so much more willing to just open up and like, if you're in a comfortable chair or you're drinking your favorite coffee or you're eating a bagel or whatever, versus, a hard, stiff chair with, a water fountain. So I think that's like, just like you said, I'm just reiterating what you said. More discipleship, I think, and not that there's anything wrong with our churches or anything like that, but what a beautiful concept of meeting people in places that give them a little bit maybe more comfort.
Yeah. And it really does make a big difference too, because once you get in that church setting, the conversation typically revolves around church, like you do your small talk and then church. But if you're in a coffee setting or a comfortable place, authentic friendships can develop. And that's a key part that we sometimes miss out on in the Catholic Church for some reason. You have your church friends and then you have your rest of your life friends. And so one thing when you're trying to make them like real friends, not like this is my category church friends that, I see on Sunday and I do the one thing with, but like true intimate relationship, because intimacy is so key to the faith. You're trying to build that. And so you can talk about the kids, and then as a mentor, you can, anything they bring up in that sacred one-on-one meeting that you're having, you can point back to God. And they're more willing in a comfortable space to bring up, I'm struggling with my kids, I'm struggling with my marriage, I'm struggling with, like your first communion program, it sucks. Like we can talk about it in a way that's more of a friendship than just like business.
Initial complaint.
Yes.
So we've done initial trust, spiritual curiosity, and then number 3 is
spiritual openness.
Yes.
So this is the point where someone acknowledges that they're open to what God might be calling them to, might be willing to change. And this one I have found when people are learning about these stages, they're like, oh, they're totally open. Or they're totally seeking, which is the next stage. These 3 stages, people kind of get mixed up because they'll think someone is actively seeking Jesus and they're not yet here in this open stage. It's still very passive. It's just kind of an acknowledgement of like, oh, I'm open to, different things. And at this stage, often people are open to everything. Like you've awakened like, oh, well, if the Catholic Church is right, then what if like Islam is right or this Protestant church is right? I had a one-on-one with someone once who was going through RCIA, had been to several classes. We went out for coffee, and I'm so glad we did, because she started saying, well, I really love your RCIA classes, but I'm also going to this New Life Church on Sunday, and then I just picked up this book about Islam, and it's so fascinating. Like she was classically open, which was good for me to know as I was walking with her, because you can't get too deep into catechesis there. You're still helping her see the difference between passively just kind of consuming things and looking at things and actually going to the next stage, which is seeking. And this is where you go from being passive to active, and you are seeking God and wanting to know him. And then the 5th stage is actually dropping one's nets and saying like, yes, I'm going to do this. Like I'm going to be an intentional disciple. There's no turning back. Mm-hmm. I'm following God no matter what the cost is. In the Catholic Church, most people are at trust and curiosity, very passive, even if they're going to church every Sunday and to all your groups and have been involved in every small group that you've ever seen or put out, or even your catechist, like they're at the beginning stages and they mean very well. And if you were to talk to them, they would say they know God and they love God. But as you talk to them, I think one thing that's really important to do here, to mention here, is that we're not judging people. So what we don't want to do is say like, oh, that person's at trust. Shame on them. But what you want to do is, as you're talking to people and discipling them, I kind of think of it as a tally mark system. Like, okay, you said this comment, so that makes me think that you're kind of in trust. So I'll put a tally mark over there. Ooh, but you said this, so I'm going to put a tally mark in the curious category. And because people are more kind of fluid, you're moving in and out of trust and curiosity and openness, really until you're at spiritually seeking. And people can go backwards. They can be like seeking God, realize that He has asked them to drop their nets and to be an intentional disciple, and they go, nah, peace out. I'm not doing that. I'm not ready.
Well, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I feel like if we're dealing with people who are in the process of being discipled, like working towards a life of discipleship of Jesus Christ, and they're coming from maybe another Christian faith tradition, that last threshold of dropping your nets is traumatic. Like, it's like for me, at least in my experience of watching other people kind of go through it from another faith tradition, like that's when the tears happen. That's when there is like a letting go. It's, I mean, we say drop the nets in a biblical reference here, but like it's dropping almost everything that you thought was true sometimes. Not everything, because if you're doing it correctly, you're building on the faith that they already have in Jesus. But it is so traumatic. And the idea that you would be accompanying that person to that point, when you get there, oh man, that's when you almost need to be like more supportive, more available, more, because like there's so much stuff they're leaving behind and it's traumatic. But those are evident things. But what about when it's a Catholic? What about when it is someone who grew up in the church who gets to that point and they're not leaving like, New Life Church, they're not leaving their fellowship community, but they are making a huge life-changing step. What does that look like for a Catholic in the progression of the thresholds?
So a lot of it for Catholics, I used to talk about, there's two kind of conversions. There's the ordinary conversion and the extraordinary conversion. And an ordinary conversion is something that's slowly building throughout your life. That's what we want our kids to have. We want them to always know Jesus and it to just get deeper very slowly over time. Extraordinary would be like me, like I was atheist, now I'm Catholic. Or St. Paul getting knocked off the horse. What are you doing? Quit persecuting me, like follow me. For Catholics, typically it's more that ordinary, slow conversion of like, oh my gosh, you mean I can have a personal relationship with Jesus? That's not just a Protestant thing. And for looking at the Catholics that I have mentored, it's been a little bit different for all of them. But I would say one thing that happens typically is their prayer life starts, like a real true prayer life, not just saying your rosaries, saying your devotions, which are good. We need those and those are beautiful. But so often as Catholics, we have our checklist and it all of a sudden switches from a checklist to a conversation with God. And then they start realizing that God talks to them and that God wants to direct them in their lives and speak to them intimately about what's going on. And they can have that intimacy with God. And that is what I've seen for Catholics start slowly turning them to intentional disciples. Because really, when you're spiritually, so they have the trust usually with the church because that's why they're there. Sometimes they're curious. You see a lot more people in the scripture studies and Bible studies and they want to learn more, but they could still just be at trust kind of. You got to talk to them to kind of know. Openness as someone who's Catholic tends to look like, oh, like, you mean I can be a saint? That's something like, that's just not like old people who died or something. Like I could do that? Really? And they start like thinking about it and then they start seeking like, well, what would that look like in my life? I guess I should maybe start praying like more than just a rosary. And then all of a sudden there's this switch where they realize like, oh wow, like I've always known with my head that Jesus was real in the Eucharist, but now like in my heart I know. I remember we had this beautiful mission, and Deacon Keith Strom with M3 Ministries was there, and he did amazing, beautiful job. And afterwards we had little prayer teams to help Catholics, learn how to pray. Praying over people and with is like the charismatic word, but praying with people is something that Catholics can do and should do. So we prayed with people afterwards, and I got to pray with this woman who came up in tears, and she's like, "Why am I crying?" I was like, well, and I walked with her some, and I knew her journey some. So I was able to be like, it's right now, like this is God, you've been seeking God, and he's telling you it's time. Yeah. So do you want to pray together? And we can pray to drop your nets and to follow him for the rest of your life. And, the tears were just flowing. So for Catholics, it can still be like a huge tearful moment. I would say for anybody who's dropping their nets, making that transition to like, this is going to be everything for me for the rest of my life. Like tears come, even if it's not like a huge knock off your horse thing, just like at a retreat. It's still huge for them. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of what it looks like. It depends on each person, again, because everybody's journey is a little bit different.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I wondered about that because I don't have a lot of experience, just as you said, like it's so baby steps of the progress for the spiritual life that you don't often see, but you did because of your position as a faith formation director. Like you were again alongside people, both Catholics and non-Catholics, coming to that end game of drop. I shouldn't even say end game, but the beginning of the end. Yeah, exactly. And so you got to see that. So I wanted to know what it looked like for Catholics who were already in the church,
yeah,
but not yet discipled. And so that's a beautiful explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's still like an exception. Unfortunately, not the rule. Like I when I had to leave, I left lots of people at all various stages.
Yeah.
And you just, you keep walking with them and praying for them and hoping that they just take that next step. And you can't force anybody to take the next step. That's between them and God. You're just accompanying them.
Okay. Is there as we wrap up this live stream, is there anything from Sherry's book that you're like, people, you got to know this?
The whole book. The whole book.
Exactly.
The whole thing. Read the whole thing. I will say this. The first half is like stats. So if you're convinced by my stat rant and you would fall asleep reading the stats, you can maybe thumb through or speed read the stats and jump to the 5 spiritual thresholds. I love the stats, so I thought it was amazing. So I was like, this is so awesome. But if you're convinced, you can like skim read that really fast to get to the spiritual thresholds, because you need that. If you want more training in the spiritual thresholds, they came out with a program called Ananias Training, which teaches you how to accompany people through these spiritual thresholds. It's an amazing, amazing program. I highly recommend going through it or going and begging your pastor to have it at your church, because it will dramatically change your parish culture if you get it in there and get it running consistently. I feel like.
That's awesome.
And I think that sounds like the perfect way to end it, because we can talk about that a little bit more, because I want to hear about that. And I think we're going to go into charisms. Am I right? Am I wrong? Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit. That's something that comes up pretty often on our podcast or our live streams. And so we're hoping we can dig in a little bit deeper and unpack charisms and then just wrap up a little bit more of forming disciples. So thank you so much, everyone who watched. If you want to type in some questions, maybe we can answer them on the podcast. Please like and share this live stream. And you can look for it also on YouTube if you want to watch it again and learn more about forming intentional disciples. So thanks, y'all. I'll see you on the podcast.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.